Welcome to Off the Wire, the podcast that helps you curb cybersecurity risk and tackle technology challenges. I'm Tanner, and I'm joined by Anthony. We're two IT executives with a combined 35 years of experience in the IT and cybersecurity field. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Off the Wire. We're going to start with a little story this week. So imagine you're kind of sitting at your desk, you're working on a project, maybe you're just looking over some emails that came in, and somewhere in your building, a user is copying and pasting a command that they saw on a HTML prompt into PowerShell. It was a fake CAPTCHA window. Now PowerShell is executing a command. That command is actually connecting to a remote website. It's downloading the first pieces of a RAT, a remote access Trojan. In this moment, what is the first thing that you want or you wish you had? I think all of us would say alerts, right? We want to be able to know about what's going on. We want to know when these kinds of things are happening. And so on today's episode, Anthony and I are going to go through alerts. We're going to talk about the alerts that we get in our environment, the ones that are more important to us, the ones that are less important, but it's still something we want to know. Talking about alerts around situational awareness, just kind of what's going on in your environment, maybe not cybersecurity related, and then also cybersecurity alerts as well. We're also going to cover alert sources and kind of where these alerts are coming from in our environments. And then we're going to finally conclude talking a little bit about alert fatigue and how you can combat that and make sure that that doesn't happen to you. So, Anthony, you ready to get started tonight?
Oh yeah, you already gave me goosebumps talking about that story.
Yeah, and for our listeners, that's something that happened in our environment this week. Now, luckily, it wasn't something that it didn't go much further than one computer. We were able to take care of it right away, thanks to some great alerts that we got. But I want to share that because we talk a lot about this. It's really hard to completely prevent something from happening in your environment. And really the best strategy nowadays is kind of knowing about it as fast as you can and maybe keeping that blast radius small, which we've talked about in the Zero Trust episode, for example. But we want to know about it right away, and so that's what this episode's about, talking about alerts. And honestly, we're just going to kind of go through this kind of back and forth and talk about different alerts that we have. And so, Anthony, I thought you might want to start us off and just maybe talk about some of the alerts, especially around cybersecurity. We're going to start in that kind of category. What alerts do you guys have set up in your environment, and what benefits did they have for you?
Yeah, I do want to touch on one thing before we get started into the alert types, but just a thought. So we had about, I think it was in 2020, it was October of 2020, we had a server where the malicious actor, they were running PowerShell through the network service, and they were trying to download malware. The Palo Alto blocked the malware from being downloaded, but if we wouldn't have gotten an alert on it, they would have just kept trying to download malware, and eventually they would have found something that didn't get blocked. So you've got to have alerting on your systems. It's very important. And our outreach is to small and medium businesses, and that's one of those things where if you need help, don't be afraid to hire a SOC or to hire a third-party service to help you get started. You definitely, if you don't have eyes on stuff, if you're not comfortable with getting everything set up yourself, get some third party to help you out with that. So for alerting, we have all kinds of things that we're looking at and monitoring. I would start with kind of like our endpoint detection and response. A lot of the things that it will alert on is like lateral movement. If someone's trying to go between hosts, that normally that communication's not there. Or if someone tries to do a brute force login, we get notified on that. So every time we get our bi-monthly pen test, we get a ton of alerts. I'll say that. And as a matter of fact, our SOC, they get a little upset with us if we don't tell them ahead of time that either we're doing the vulnerability scan or we're doing the pen test.
Yeah, kind of building on that, Anthony. I mean, to me, like, how do you test your SOC if you tell them every single time you're doing that kind of thing? I guess you maybe just have an event, but I don't want to wait till I have an event, but to test how they're doing.
Well, we just naturally test them because we forget sometimes. But yeah, it is good to be in good communication. But I do think you're right. Like, you do want to test your SOC every once in a while for sure. The other thing is it does look for, we get alerts on malicious PowerShell. Now, would it have caught the one that hit your system, I would not guarantee that at all. It's really if it recognizes it as malicious software trying to do something malicious, and I couldn't guarantee it would do that or not. Also, just unusual logins. So I think the one time I mentioned it on a previous episode, but like we had a dispatcher that logged into an IT workstation. And anyways, it was one of our IT folks working with the dispatcher, but we saw that, and that raised an alert for us. But that's another good thing to have alerts on.
On the EDR side, we have some of those as well. I'll just have a couple. Anything that blocks, just generally, anything that, whether it's Outlook popping open a PowerShell or anything like that, we get alerted on. Now, a lot of times it's not necessarily something we take action on, but it's just good to know. The other thing that we do is we do have some kind of blocks in place, whitelisting applications, and because of that, basically we're blacklisting a lot of other applications. One of those is any type of cloud storage applications like Dropbox, Google Drive. We actually block those from running. And if someone actually tries to install that, we go ahead and alert on it anyway. So basically, if it hits that block rule, we alert on it. Even though it's blocking it, it's actually taking care of it. Just in case sometimes a user doesn't understand, or in some cases, they're trying to push the limits of the rules, and we want to know about it. And then also, of course, you could have people nefariously trying to download one of those things to maybe sync out a directory or something like that.
We do a little something different on that. So for Dropbox and like Google Drive and just like those third-party applications that we don't internally support, we do have a couple of partners that we work with that utilize those. Our website vendor, they use Dropbox, and our statewide organization. I wish they would both drop off of it, but unfortunately they don't. And then also we have another thing with like Intuit or QuickBooks. So we don't get an active alert. It's one of those things where once a month we'll go in and look at some of the shadow IT alerts, and we'll see if there's a different user utilizing those applications.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, thought we'd kind of talk about domain alerts. I think most people are either running Active Directory, or at this point, maybe there's a few people that are running it through Azure. But on the domain side, we have quite a bit of alerts set up. Some of these come through different systems, but they're related to domain, so I listed them here. Things like new accounts that get created. So every time there's a new account that gets created, we get alerted on that. Any type of adds to privileged accounts, privileged groups. So you're thinking like your admins group. But when we had Exchange admins, when we had Exchange in-house, domain admins, all those kinds of things. Accounts being enabled. So if you have a disabled account and someone enables the account, we get alerted on that. That can be an indicator of someone kind of compromising your domain. They just say re-enabling some old accounts. Account lockouts, and this started as something that was actually just kind of a customer service thing. We wanted, if people were getting locked out of their machine, we wanted to just be alerted to it so we could reach out to them and say, hey, you having some trouble. A lot of times this was related to a mobile device, doing some like an IMAP check-in or something like that, and it had an old password. But also this could fall in the security as well. So as you see if you see account getting locked out like regularly, that's something we look into. And password resets. So anytime someone resets their password, we get alerted. So if someone is compromised, maybe they just get into the session, they want to actually get the user permanently, they can potentially just change their password. And so those are a few things on the domain side that we do.
We have it toned down just a little bit. We get notified if someone makes a domain admin account. And then also if someone, basically, if they escalate their privileges, we'll get notification on that. But for the normal users, we don't get an alert, but we do a lot of reviews monthly. And that's one of those things where we can see new users and the groups that they were added to. We'll get into alert fatigue, but that's one of those things I'll mention with like the account lockout. We do notifications on that, alerts on that, which is great. But I'll say this, you want to, if you've got some application that keeps locking out accounts, I would try to come up with an alternate or some other method. So I know that's not always possible, but if you got a certain offending application that's locking out your users, I would try to mitigate that if at all possible, or you're just going to start ignoring those alerts.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We do have one application that kind of does that. We're in the process of upgrading it. Apparently, one of the kind of the features of the new upgrade is a better handling of authentication. It's it's AD connected, and basically, if someone mistypes their password once, it tries like 50 times for some reason. I don't understand why if it didn't work the first time, like the second time's going to work all magically. But agreed with that. I mean, up until this point of us doing this upgrade, we had started to kind of get a little bit fatigued there and say, oh well, it's such and such a server, so we know that's that application. Someone just mistyped their password. Kind of thinking through a few other things. On the firewall side, we do get an email alert whenever the firewall blocks like a critical attempt or a critical, basically someone trying to actually do a vulnerability. Maybe it's Confluence or Apache or just some sort of web server IIS vulnerability. Kind of rethinking this one. This is actually one of the ones I was going to bring up for alert fatigue. If the firewall is actually blocking it, we're not going to do anything about it. I think this is one of those we're probably going to get rid of at some point. So under Microsoft 365 Defender, we get some phish alerts. Basically, if a phish gets delivered to someone and it gets kind of past which is kind of interesting. I don't know how it basically determines like it gets past its rules, but it still delivers it. But it'll alert us on that. That actually has been very handy. We've caught several times where someone, and it may be because they were a more trusted organization, like they had received emails from that person in the past. But that's helped us quite a few times where we just reach out to the person, hey, like, don't open this email. Wish it would kind of just block it, but I don't know. There's something that I guess it doesn't meet that threshold for some reason.
The last time I started bragging about a piece of software, they had a major event and took down the entire globe. So I'm a little reluctant to do that, but I'm gonna do that anyway. I'm brave. So we use Avanon, or I believe it's called Checkpoint now, and we use that for our email filtering. It does a really good job. We don't have that case. It basically just gives us reporting on all the stuff it blocked. One nice report it'll do is it'll give us a list of the stuff that would make it through on Microsoft, or whether it get delivered to your inbox or the junk box in Microsoft. But that's one of those things where outside of it does a lot of shadow IT notifications, but mainly we're just looking at it on a month-to-month basis to see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're going to be looking into next year as well. Try to like beef that up a little bit. We've tried a few different products and not found one that really just meets our needs particularly well. And moving on to MFA, and this is one that actually has been hugely beneficial to us. Is we get an alert whenever someone reports a fraudulent MFA. So if they get an MFA prompt on their phone, we use Duo, but obviously there's others, and they actually decline it. They say, hey, this is not me logging in. We get an email alert on that, and that's been very useful. Really, most of the time, we have found that some of the Microsoft applications, if you leave them up on your computer kind of randomly over the weekend, they'll like try to check in and they'll need the MFA. But there have been a couple times where I think maybe one time, maybe a couple times where we got one and someone said, hey, I just didn't get this. I think it was kind of the same situation, but we went ahead and reset the password anyway. Even though obviously they declined an MFA, the person's not in, even if it was someone nefarious. It just gave us the opportunity to go ahead and reset that account. Unlikely the account was even touched at all, but hey, that's just like one step where we can immediately step in and go ahead and do that, kind of take proactive action. So we really like that one.
Yeah, the other thing to watch out with the MFA is just your locked out accounts. It's like we use Duo as well, and when an account gets locked out, and I'm sure you get that, that's another one to keep an eye on, and make sure you're reaching out to the user when you get that. So some of the other alerts that we look at is suspicious network activity. So if we get some traffic spikes, or also if we get port scanning, and that's something we get to see every time we do a vulnerability scan or the pen test. Those happen. On occasion, we're getting alerts outside that just because there is a entity trying to do something. I really don't think I've had a false positive on a port scanning, unless you count our scans doing it, but that's not really a false positive. Another thing to look out for is data exfiltration. If you've got a large amount of data getting transferred outside your network, now, if you've got something legitimately going on, you're going to want to be able to whitelist that so you don't get alerts on it. all the time, but it's definitely, if you're seeing a large amount of data getting uploaded from your network, that's, unless they're marketing's uploading videos, that shouldn't happen a whole lot. And the other thing is just people using non-approved cloud storage systems, like you mentioned earlier, Tanner, Dropbox, and Google Drive. And we don't get alerts, but that's something that we monitor and we check on an occasional basis to see what's going on with our end users.
Yeah, we got several of those things. You talked about the suspicious network activity as well. Most of those are through our SIEM or our XDR platform that we use. And we have a few other ones that you did mention that we also get. Anytime a new account logs into a machine, basically, if it's it's the first login on any machine, we get alerted on that. That's typically something you might see as someone maybe tried to recon and work their way around your network. Multiple login failures or successes, that's all in there. Large file egress, you talked about that. We kind of basically subscribe to a module through our security vendor that actually we do a port mirror and actually push our traffic into their sensors. And that's something we just started. But we're actually starting to see some alerts from that. Not many, but there's a lot of alerts that are part of that. Things like ransomware activities, you might imagine. They monitor DNS requests. So anytime someone even requests a DNS entry from a malicious domain, they let you know about it, even if nothing happens. Maybe eventually that might have potentially helped us in that earlier scenario I was talking about. Any type of vulnerable protocols, like if you have telnet running around your network, it'll basically let you know, like, hey, this is a protocol that's vulnerable. You either need to isolate it some other way or basically protect it some other way, or you need to stop using it. And one that I think every IT person wishes they got, and it's just, like I said, we just got the ability to do it, is clear text authentications. And you might think to yourself, well, clear text authentications, that's not something I really need. If you've ever been in an environment for a very long time, what you'll find is there's just so many different things that get built over time. And you're not sitting there every 6 months and going through everything that you've ever built as an IT group, and even your predecessors have built as an IT group, and checking everything over. And so we've actually used this in the past to catch a couple things, like some old processes that were using some kind of those vulnerable protocols, clear text authentications. And we could either, like I said, eliminate those or transition them to a more secure way.
Yeah, I can't remember what tool it is right now, but we just recently got that ability, and to be able to see Telnet and FTP, and also what a lot of people don't think about is LDAP. So if you're not using LDAP-S, LDAP is just unencrypted. Your actual AD information getting passed over unencrypted. So you definitely want to watch out for that. Another thing that we just got for 2024 was rapid encryption activity. So our backup appliance, if it sees some of the data starting to get encrypted, it will notify us on that. One tool that we're going to have in 2025 that I'm super excited about is a OT monitoring solution. And this is something that I'm super stoked about, because we get notifications like, if we get abnormal traffic, network traffic in our IT environment, we get notified. But in our OT currently, we don't know. So we've got stuff locked down. Our substations, they shouldn't be able to talk to each other. They should be able to talk to the server, and the server should be able to talk to the substations. But if you go from one sub to the next, that traffic's blocked. But if somehow they were able to communicate, we wouldn't get a notification on that. And when we get this new OT monitoring solution, we're going to be made aware of that, and amongst several other things. So super excited about that, and can't wait to have that insight in our OT environment.
Yeah, that's a good one. We're actually looking to expand that prior module I was talking about, expand some sensors into OT as well. It's not an OT specific solution, but it may give us it'll at least, at the very least, record network traffic. So our login would be much more enhanced. And that is another thing that solution does I didn't mention. And even though it's not alerts, logging all your network traffic is very beneficial if you're having to look at what happened after an event. The final thing I had as far as like security alerts that we get is we get alerts on a dark web activity. So if any of our emails show up on the dark web, whether or not it's related to anything kind of us being compromised, for a long time, especially our employees that have been there, more seasoned employees, they don't necessarily, or they didn't at least initially, create personal emails. So they signed up for a lot of different things with work email, as people probably did, the work email being probably the first email they ever had. For the folks that are coming in kind of now, they've had personal emails for a long time, so it's not as much of an issue. But from time to time, maybe a LinkedIn or somebody will get hacked, and then one of our emails is part of that. So it's not really anything that we do specifically on our own network, but we alert the user and we try to help them reset their password on whatever platform it is. So our first section there talking about security alerts. I think we hit quite a few of those there. And then we had another section here just talking about, I don't know, we're calling it situational awareness, configuration kind of things, just things that like you need to keep an eye on. And some of these may be active alerts. Some of these may just be like emails that you kind of check into, or maybe it's a report that you just like look over weekly or quarterly or something like that. So Anthony, what are the ones that are like important to you that you feel like really keep you like kind of tuned into your environment?
Yeah, we've got a lot of dashboards with different applications, and we also got some reports that we look at. One of the things that we look at monthly is it's with account hygiene. We see all of our stale accounts. That's something we look at monthly. We also look at risky accounts, and what that will be is an account that has high privileges, like it's a domain admin or something that just has higher privileges than a regular end user. And if they're jumping from endpoint to endpoint, it'll also showcase that. Another thing we get is duplicated passwords. The other thing, and this really messes with the end users, is if our end users, if they set their account with a password that's been on a breach list, we notify them and we make them change that. Anyways, I've had a lot of conversations with folks, and that's one thing where we talk about passphrases instead of passwords every time we have that conversation, and we also point out a lot of times I'll take them to have I been pwned and show them if you're using the same password with your personal stuff and work stuff, anytime something gets hacked, like they're going to have this password as well too, and just kind of stress to use different passwords.
That's a great, I like that touch point too. It's a good reminder of like what they need to be doing and kind of that little checkpoint for educating the users that is usually very effective. Passphrases I try to encourage as well. I don't know why people have, it seems like they struggle getting that. I think for years we would tell people to just do something cryptic, and I think that's just kind of stuck out in their mind. But on the kind of to your account alerts there, I will say we take the stale accounts or just a little further. We actually disable the account. We have a script that disables any accounts if they haven't been logged into for over a year. We'd go ahead and just disable them. Now we do have it send us an alert that says these are the accounts I disabled, so that if something pops up, we kind of like, okay, these are ones we need to take a look at first. So far, I don't think we've had a single one actually cause us an issue later. I'd have to check into that to just double check, but I don't think we've had that. The other thing kind of, and this is maybe not account hygiene, but more environment hygiene. Any type of group policy changes, we get alerted on the group policy change, and then we get alerted on what it changed. So if someone added a printer, or maybe they as a shortcut, or something else, or maybe they just made like a Chrome configuration change or something like that, we get alerted on that. We've seen, obviously this has not been compromised by that, but we have seen in the past where people, once they compromise the AD, they actually use group policy to further propagate themselves throughout the environment. That's one of those. Hopefully you're going to find out about it ahead of time, but if not, someone putting something or pushing out a MSI file or something like that to the entire environment would be kind of a really big clue. On our firewalls, anytime we commit on our firewalls, we get an email alert about that. We don't have that many commits. I would say maybe like one a day, maybe two a day if we're really working in some sort of new configuration. So this is honestly as much, this could be a security alert, but really a lot of times it's just kind of checking in, be sure we don't have any type of someone having an account that's compromised. We just say, hey, you working on the firewall? Yep. And that's about as far as we take it. It does record obviously what's changed as well. So in the event that we do have maybe some sort of disaster or something like that, we can go back and kind of figure out what rule got put in there.
We use that. One, I think it's an important alert to get, but two, we've got an unwritten rule where we've got Jeff, our firewall administrator, and for the most part, he should be making the firewall changes. But what will happen is if I see someone else doing a commit, I will put them on the spot and say, "Did you communicate that with Jeff before you put that firewall rule in?" And anyways, that's just a good. If you got a specific person that's responsible for your firewall, that's just a good check just to make sure that they're aware or they're the ones making the config changes.
Yeah, that's a good point. We have a primary and a backup, and then we have someone that makes changes into our firewalls in between our kind of our OT and IT environments. So it's a little, there's a few more hands in there, but this helps us kind of keep an eye on that. We also have several actually backup alerts. Obviously, backup failures. I mean, that's going to be a number one, right? If a backup fails for whatever reason. But one thing that we have started doing is backup successes as well. And a lot of people may kind of call us out on this and say, why do I need to know when a backup's successful? If I know when a backup fails, then I'm good, right? With most backup kind of pieces of software suites, how do you know it? How do you know you're getting the backup, right? If you don't actually, or you're not getting an alert when something's successful. We have had a situation where this has been a long, long time ago with a different backup solution, but where the backup solution failed, it was not getting backups. It wasn't having a failed backup. It never really got that far. I mean, it actually wasn't it was basically hosed, and it couldn't actually send us any alerts that said we were getting a failed backup. So I guess maybe if you're checking a backup repository with like a different method, another thing, but then obviously you can do that. You can that rabbit hole can go pretty far. And this is one of the only times that we do this, but we just feel backups. We feel very strongly that backups are so important that we need to know they're working all the time. So we get that. And that's something that maybe not a lot of people would do, but it has been pretty successful for us.
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate. This is something I got told early on by my first IT boss, and he said the most important job you've got is backups as a IT person. So I definitely can't stress that enough. Moving on, we've got a few more things that we look at. So for endpoint monitoring, we actually look if any server or workstation is missing EDR. We had some issues years ago where we had some devices that didn't have EDR, and it kind of bit us in the butt. So we want to make sure that we're looking at that. So that's something we look at on the monthly basis. Another thing is if someone adds a scheduled task or a cron job, that gets logged. And so we take a look at that. That doesn't happen too frequently, but it does happen. I mean, we really haven't had an issue where it was done maliciously, but that's just something we just make sure we take a look at. And then next, we've got basically where USB drives. So this is something I'm really on the fence on, but right now we're just monitoring it. But if someone plugs in a USB drive and they're using it to download or install or put anything on that USB drive, we get logs and alerts on, or we don't get alerts, we get logs, and we can get alerts on it. But right now we just look at it monthly. But really what we're on the fence on is just to block USB drives altogether. I've talked to some organizations that do that, and I know they do have some headaches with that. So I'm really on the fence, but we're leaning towards going that way. But anyways, I got mixed feelings on it. But at the very least, at least we get notifications to where we can look at on a monthly basis.
A couple more I'll chime in with. These are what I call like our misconfiguration, right? So one that I didn't mention in the backup one, but I want to mention is VM's not backed up. So we have a script that alerts us basically every day if there's any VMs that are not in the backups. Sometimes you make a new server, you don't think about it. And some people will say, well, if you back up, depending on a certain level, maybe you can back up at like your data center level or something like that. Sometimes we create a VM and we don't want to back up, right? Maybe it's for testing. Maybe sometimes we'll spin up something just to see if certain applications worth trying, and we don't want to back up. So we have that in place in case we do have something that we're staying with that makes it into production to make sure it gets in that backup. On the MFA side, we have any users that are in bypass. So MFA is not applying to them. A lot of people might say, well, should any user be in bypass? We've had a couple examples where people are in bypass. Number one is when we're setting up a device, like if we're setting up a mobile device for them, we put it in bypass so that we don't have to multi-factor like 27 times as we're setting up this device. That's one option. We have had a couple times where someone forgot their device. They came all the way into work. They didn't have their cell phone and they live 45 minutes away. So what we did in that scenario is we did put them in bypass until they could get that device, but we also have an ability in our SOC platform where we actually can like make them like look at a user with like more, trying to think of the right wording, but they look more closely at a user than they would another user. So if we suspect something, we can kind of enable that. So on that particular user, we turn that on. And so anything that happens to that user, they take like an extra look at that day. But that's one as well. And then another misconfiguration, it's not really a misconfiguration per se, but it could result in some really potential huge downsides, is we have alerts if snapshots are left open. For those that may not run VMware, this doesn't apply to you, but for those that do run VMware, when you make a snapshot, it creates basically a copy of a disk. All right, it stops writing to one disk, it creates a new disk, and you write to that. If you allow those snapshots to go for a long period of time, like weeks or months, and you try to actually roll those snapshots back into it, you can have issues. You can have the server go down, and it can take like extremely long time to put that snapshot back into the main disk. So we have that, and just in case, like for example, if we do updates, we always take snapshots, and if we just forget to basically roll a snapshot back in, it helps us on that.
Yeah, don't quote me on that, but I believe that we get a notification if a snapshot exists for longer than 24 hours. I'm not certain on that, but I believe that we do have that because we've had that issue in the past. And anyways, that's something that we want to make sure we keep an active eye on. Another thing that we look at, I'll look at applications that were installed. And I mean, for the most part, only the IT folks have the ability to install applications. So we don't see a whole lot. We have some pre-approved applications that end users can install through our, I don't even know what to call it, basically with Manage Engine, the self-service portal. And the other thing that this is something new that we can see is if people install browser extensions. It's not something we want to get alerts on, but we do take a look at that just to see what people got going on with that. And then the other thing I'll mention, I mentioned Checkpoint before, but we get a report on basically how often someone's targeted. And I didn't think that this would be of a whole lot of benefit before until we got to see it in live in action. But people are going to get attacked frequently. You know, they'll have malware sent to them or they'll have phishing emails sent to them. But I've seen it twice since we've had Checkpoint ramp up drastically. I'm talking like going from 30 to 40 hits a month to like 180 to 200 hits. And the first one, I watched it for 2 months. For 2 months, they went from like 30 to 40 to up pushing about 200 for 2 months. And I had that end user go on Zoom Info and basically request his information to get removed from that. Well, guess what? It dropped down to like less than 30 after that. So that's something, if we see a huge spike, twice we've done this, have the end user go on Zoom Info and request their information be removed. Now, Zoom Info, they won't show that your information is on there. But anyways, we're 2 for 2. 2 people have requested their information to go away. And then we saw that their phishing and malware that they got sent to them drastically reduced. So that's something, we'll share that in the notes, that link for Zoom Info. But that's something you definitely, if you got someone that's targeted, you want to have that end user request their information be removed from that.
Yeah, we actually had that happen this week. We started noticing like a little bit of a uptick in just sales calls and stuff. So we went out there, and they had the ability to put in your email and their phone number too, so you can remove it if it's a phone number that people are using. Going back to VMware a little bit, there's some things that we do that aren't like configuration kind of deals, but just maybe like day to day. Obviously, we're monitoring like CPU, memory high, disk utilization, guest and host. Those are definitely like kind of situational awareness alerts that we get. But one that's, I don't know if it's specific to VMware, but anytime that there's any contention in memory, we get alarms about that. So this is like ballooning memory, compressing, any type of swaps. Doesn't happen very often or really rarely at all in our environment, but that can be a huge indicator of some pretty big problems down the road. May not be right away, but you just don't want to get in a situation where you have like a widespread issue because you're getting resource constrained. So those are kind of things that we take a look at as well. And then I had a couple really random ones. So I throw a few in here at the end. So on phone calls, we get email alerted on 911 calls. So if anyone dials 911, there's a certain group of people that get alerted to it. Obviously, our 24/7 operations center is one of those, and they're going to reach out to the person, be sure something's okay. A lot of times, it's just a mistaken dial, but there has been a few times where someone called 911 and it was legitimate, and we were able to like quickly figure out there was a situation, and that helped quite a bit. So that's kind of one that's not necessarily something specific to IT per se, but it's one that we also get as an IT group just because it's dealing with the phone system. And then surveillance cameras, not necessarily like I said, a cybersecurity kind of thing, but we have surveillance cameras for physical security, of course. And every once in a while, we'll get a camera not recording. Maybe it got hit by lightning. It might have got water in it and just shorted out, something like that. So if any cameras are not recording, if the NVR is not able to record from them, we get an alert about that. And that has helped us figure out, typically it's lightning with an outdoor camera, but that's helped us figure out that a lot quicker. And some of the cameras, physical security is not something we talk about in this podcast a lot, but that's something that from an employee safety kind of point of view, cybersecurity and physical security, at least an employee of physical security goes, is even more important to them. So it's something we take a look at as well. So I think, Anthony, you had something kind of future alerts you're looking into. I thought we'd talk about before we kind of move to the last few topics and conclude here.
Yeah, I'll reiterate the one earlier for our OT environment. We're looking forward to that monitoring solution, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of alerts that I'm not even aware of or have the capability. But the one that we're looking at a new vulnerability tool, and it will basically do an audit and do a report on which CIS controls that we have implemented or not implemented. So we do the CIS, their framework, and we also apply their group policies. Now we haven't rolled that out to all systems, but like for Windows 11 and like Server 2022, and we're working our way backwards. But all of those systems, they have all of the group policies from CIS. Well, they don't have all of them. There's some things that we had to disable just because in our environment, some stuff won't work. But for the most part, we have all of those group policies rolled out. Well, this new vulnerability scanner system that we're putting in, it actually has the ability to audit those workstations and servers to see if they're compliant against the CIS controls. So there's other tools that'll do that besides the vulnerability management tool, but this one, it looks like the easy button to make sure that we're actively rolling that out to all of our workstations and servers.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I'll definitely be interested as you roll that out and see how that goes. So talking about, we're going to talk just briefly about alert sources and then we kind of move on to fatigue. But a lot of times I think there's a misconception that if you don't have a SIEM, that you don't have the ability to get alerts. So obviously a SIEM really helps. So there's a lot of the things I talked about. I know, some of the ones you've talked about, that having a SIEM makes really, really easy because it's a central place to get all these logs. And based on certain logs, you can obviously alert. But you don't have to have a SIEM to get that. Just one example of this, I'm not going to go into 20 examples, but AD Audit Plus from Manage Engine. This gives you the ability to get a ton of those AD alerts that I talked about, Anthony talked about. It's about $600 a year for 2 domain controllers. So very affordable. So even though we talked a lot about our SIEM platforms and our kind of cybersecurity platforms and those alerts that they give us, it's a ton of alerts you can do without all of that as well. And then applications a lot of times can send alerts on their own. There's plenty of applications. I mean, I think many of the ones we mentioned that you can just set up an email address and it'll just send you alerts. Now, they may not be formatted quite as good, or it may be a little bit more confusing, kind of weed through the alerts since they're coming from so many different places. But that's something you can also try as well. And then moving on to the last topic, and Anthony, I thought you might kick us off. Alert fatigue is a thing. So, like, you've already given a little bit of your thoughts earlier. Do you want to kind of go into any more detail on any of that?
Yeah, alert fatigue is really a pet peeve for me. This is something I got instilled in me early on in my career, but this is something that I stress the importance of alert fatigue to all my folks. I've done it for years now, even before I got to Fort County. This is something I've always kind of lived by, is making sure you're only getting alerts on the stuff that you really need to, and make sure you're not getting a ton of false alerts. I know it's difficult to stop false positives sometimes, but you really need to make this a concerted effort. So, just a general rule of thumb, the way our department operates, and this is, well, I would hate to recommend this to anyone, but we've had a lot of success with it, is for alerts that are critical that we need to respond to, they come via text. If it's something that's not like super important, maybe it's important that we want to get a notification on, but it's not so important that we need to fix it after hours or respond to it within minutes, is we'll do that by email. So like we have people that are on call 24/7, and if it's a text alert, it's something that you need to respond to. If it's an email alert, it's something that can wait till business hours. And I'll say this, we talked about this method to our engineering department. So they were getting alerts from our SCADA environment constantly. They had everything getting sent to them by email. And what happened is they basically, were just ignoring everything. I'm not saying I shouldn't say that. They weren't ignoring everything, but they were just getting overload, and people didn't know what to do with all that. So I worked with them and kind of just told them our method. And what they did is they're more important alerts. If it's like a whole substation going down or just something major, they'll get a text alert on, and the rest of them will come over by email. So that's something I would recommend if you have that issue, is to look at separating it. And I hate to do a plug for a vendor twice in one podcast, but if there's another application out there, I'm not aware of it, but we found this out from the folks at South River. But Verizon has a tool called EMAG. Don't ask me what that stands for. You can look it up. It's EMAG. And it allows you to send more than 160 characters in a text message. And also, the main reason we looked at it is our engineering department. They were sending out so many text messages that it was getting marked as spam to people that weren't on Verizon. And anyways, when they started using EMAG, it didn't get labeled as spam. Just the ability to get more than 160 characters, that's worth it alone. And the people that receive the text, they don't have to be on Verizon. You can open it up to where they can talk to all the other providers. So anyways, if you heavily rely on a text-based solution or SMS-based solution, I would look at EMAG. It's like $110 a month for that product.
Yeah, I agree with that. Something that we use it for a lot more than just alerting for IT, but we have our own short code. So for those that may not be aware, short code is basically a 5-digit code. You probably see this from a lot of vendors, that you basically have to go through the carriers, and they have to do I'm not going to call it like a background check, but they basically look into you and be sure that you're a legitimate company. And once they do that, they basically give you a lot more leeway on how many messages you can send, and also like what constitutes a spam. So your rates can be into the millions per second. So we have that. So anything that we do related to text, we'll use that just so we don't run into that issue. But that's a great product. If we didn't use texting for other things in our environment, more kind of, I guess, public facing things, then we'd probably look into that. And as far as alert fatigue is concerned, I agree with you. It's something that we're kind of taking a look at as well. One of the things I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier is that critical alerts message, or basically when our firewall blocks something, any type of critical attack or alert, it's blocking it. Do we really need to know it's blocking it? This happens on pretty much a daily basis at this point. There's always someone out there trying something, especially on our public facing IPs. So I think that's one of those things that we're starting to look at. And I know that it sounds kind of crazy to end an episode talking about all the great alerts we're getting by saying that maybe we're getting too many alerts, but I think really we just wanted to provide people examples of some of the things that we're looking at and how helpful they are. But I think everyone has to go through this process where it's kind of like a recipe. You see a recipe online, but then as you make it, you kind of tailor a few different ingredients, a little more of this, a little less of that, until it tastes just right for you. And I think that's kind of how alerts are, right? It's something that needs to be just right for your environment. So in your environment, maybe texting, like to Anthony's point, is the right way to go. That triage level that you talked about there with texting and emails. For other environments, maybe emails are sufficient, and maybe a certain level of emails is what you're looking for, maybe only the most critical of things. Some of this could be dependent on how many people you have in your IT environment and many other factors. So definitely just kind of custom tailor some of the recommendations we gave you to what fits you. And you guys probably have some alerts that we haven't heard about. So definitely give us a shout out and tell us about anything that you have found that you're alerted on that really, really helps out in your environment. And kind of how I'll kind of finish this in section before we sign off is kind of to Anthony's point. He kind of brought up first thing off the bat. So if you feel like this is kind of blowing, you're treading water at this point after listening down to this point in the podcast, get someone to help you. If you have a really good a security operations center, SOC, then they're going to be able to probably look at all these alerts that are coming in and help you figure out where you really need to take action on. But they're also going to help you kind of finesse these alerts and get them down to where it's manageable for you. There's a bunch of great ones out there, so just look into those. If you feel like it's not something you can take on for yourself, I highly recommend getting a really good vendor to help you out in that area. Anthony, any final thoughts on alerts before we sign off this episode?
I'm sure there's a lot that we haven't covered, but I think this is just a good start for to get people's minds thinking about things. But no, that's it, Tanner.
All right. So for all of our listeners, we really appreciate you. We really enjoy doing this podcast, and the reason we really do that is because of listeners like you guys. As I mentioned earlier, if there's feedback for us, please reach out. You can email us at show@offthewirepodcast.com, or you can reach out to us on social media, either to our show pages or to us directly. Be happy to hear any feedback you might have, any show ideas, or in this case, maybe some alerts that you have that are really, really helpful. Off the Wire is released every other Monday. And until next time, this is Off the Wire